The basement that breathed. Some places don't want you inside them. You don't know it at first. Everything looks normal. The concrete walls, the exposed wiring, the smell of sawdust and wet earth. You're just doing your job. You're just a guy with a hard hat and a flashlight and a to-do list. You're not thinking about what's hiding in the dark. You're not thinking about corners. But sometimes the dark has already thought about you. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that in the spring of 2012, I was a 23-year-old construction worker and junior site engineer, operating out of the greater Houston area. I'd been in the trade since I was 19. Started as a laborer hauling materials, worked my way up to someone who could read blueprints and actually understand what they were looking at. I wasn't a foreman yet, but I was getting there. I was good at my job. I was methodical. I wasn't the type to spook easily. I want you to hold on to that, because what I'm about to tell you shook me to my core, and I've never fully been able to explain it. The job site was a medical and dental office building on the outskirts of the Katy suburb, about 25 minutes west of downtown Houston. The building itself was a modest two-story structure that had been standing since the mid-90s. Our crew had been contracted to expand it, specifically to excavate and finish a basement level that would include a utility bathroom, 2 climate-controlled storage rooms, and a secondary records archive. We were also extending the main floor outward on the east side to create a new patient waiting area. There were 4 of us on the crew that particular evening. Myself, Marcus, a big quiet guy from San Antonio who had forearms like bridge cables. Dre, our youngest guy at 21, always had earbuds in. And Jordan, who was technically our foreman but acted more like a glorified babysitter half the time. We liked Jordan. He was the kind of guy who brought breakfast tacos to job sites and didn't yell when you made a mistake. By October of that year, we had made serious progress. The basement had been fully excavated, the concrete forms poured, the walls sealed. We had functioning overhead lights wired into a temporary power supply running from the building's main panel. The basement still smelled like raw earth and fresh cement, that particular combination that I've never been able to smell since without feeling something cold move through me. That night, Jordan had gone upstairs and out through the side door to help Marcus and Dre with exterior framing work on the eastern add-on. The 3 of them were working by floodlights outside. I was alone in the basement doing a basic walkthrough of the electrical routing. Nothing complex, just checking that conduit brackets were secured before. We brought in the inspector at the end of the week. We didn't carry phones on us while working. You'd understand why if you'd ever tried using a touchscreen with concrete dust and joint compound caked into every crease of your hands. We kept our phones and personal items in our jackets, and the jackets stayed on hooks near the main entrance upstairs. What we did carry on our person always were compact LED flashlights clipped to the tool loops on our vests. That detail becomes important very quickly. I was crouched near the base of the east wall, checking a conduit bracket when the lights went out. Not flickered, not dimmed. Gone. Instant and total. The basement became a kind of darkness I can only describe as pressurized, the kind that makes your eyes strain forward like they're trying to generate their own light. I stayed still for a moment, listening. No hum of the temporary panel. No ambient sound from outside filtering through the structure. Just silence and the very soft sound of my own breathing. I wasn't alarmed yet. Power interruptions at job sites happen constantly. A breaker trips, a squirrel touches the wrong transformer. A crew 3 blocks over pulls too much load. I assumed it was something external, probably an area outage. I started reaching for my flashlight, and that's when I heard it. A rattling sound, dry and percussive, like a handful of loose change shaken inside a tin can, rhythmic enough to rule out settling concrete or shifting pipes, coming from the direction of the small room we'd framed out for the future bathroom, maybe 15 feet ahead of me. I got my flashlight out, clicked it on, and aimed it toward the sound. The bathroom doorway had a pre-hung door installed. Just the door, no trim yet, no hardware beyond a basic knob. It was pulled most of the way closed, leaving maybe a 3-inch gap. The rattling was definitely coming from inside. My first thought was Marcus or Dre. Maybe one of them had come down without me hearing and was messing with something in there. That made the most logical sense. I walked to the door. I reached my right hand around the edge of the frame and rested it on the knob. I don't know why I paused. There was no good reason to. I've tried to explain it to people since, and the best I can say is that something in my body was receiving information that my brain hadn't processed yet. Some old, pre-rational circuit that deals in instinct rather than reason was telling me to wait. I waited maybe 3 seconds. Then I opened the door. My flashlight swept the interior of the small room, unfinished drywall, a chalk line on the floor marking where the toilet would be roughed in, a stack of PVC pipe sections against the left wall. And standing in the far right corner, facing directly into the wall so that I could not see their face, was a person, dressed entirely in black. Black hoodie, black pants, dark shoes, tall, close to 6 feet, standing completely still with their nose maybe 2 inches from where 2 walls met, like a child being punished, like something that wanted very badly not to be seen. I didn't speak. I don't think I could have. And then they turned their head. Not their body, just their head. Slowly, the way a deer will rotate its ears toward a sound before the rest of it reacts. They turned their head toward my flashlight, and I saw their eyes catch the beam. That glow. That flat, reflective glow. I slammed the door, spun around, and ran for the stairs. My boots on the concrete steps sounded like a drumline in that enclosed space. Boom, 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 boom. And I hit the main floor and blew through the side door into the night air. Marcus, Dre, and Jordan were standing near the truck, looking like they were in the early stages of wrapping up for the night. All 3 of them. All accounted for. The power outage had apparently killed the floodlights too, which had effectively ended their work outside. I was breathing hard. I could feel my pulse in my temples. "Was anyone else in the building tonight?" I asked. Anyone, a property manager, an after-hours inspector, anyone from the dental office staff. 3 blank looks. 3 head shakes. I told them what I saw. Jordan's expression shifted from skeptical to cautious in about half a second. He was the kind of foreman who'd rather investigate a false alarm than ignore a real one. The 4 of us went back down into the basement together, Jordan and I with flashlights, Marcus holding a heavy pry bar more out of habit than anything else. The bathroom was empty. The entire basement was empty. We checked both storage areas, every corner, every shadow. Nothing. Whoever or whatever I'd seen in that corner was gone. No way out that I could identify. No broken window, no hidden hatch, no explanation. The guys were gracious about it. Nobody mocked me outright, but I could see it in the way they moved. The casual body language of people humoring a coworker who'd spooked themselves in the dark. We packed up. The 3 of them drove off in the crew truck. I was the key holder that night, so I stayed behind to lock the building. I sat in my car with the engine running for probably 2 minutes. And then, and I genuinely cannot tell you why, because every rational part of me was screaming to just go home, I got back out of the car. I unlocked the building. I went to the basement door. I clicked on my flashlight and my phone light simultaneously. one in each hand, and I walked down those stairs. I made it to the bottom step. I stopped. The silence in that basement, that specific quality of silence, was like something physical, like standing inside a held breath. I was about to turn around. I had my weight shifted to my back foot already. Then the rattling started again. Same room, same sound. I didn't look. I didn't even think. My body made the decision before my mind could debate it. I turned and ran up those stairs so fast I nearly lost my footing on the top step, slammed the basement door, locked the building, got in my car and drove home without once checking my rearview mirror. I never worked alone in that basement again. We finished the job 2 weeks later without further incident. I've thought about it ever since. Who was that person? How did they get in? How did they leave without us seeing them go? Why were they standing in that corner with their face to the wall? I don't have answers. I never got them. Some doors, once you open them, don't tell you everything that was waiting on the other side. Something was already downstairs. Here's something nobody tells you about fear. It has a temperature. Not metaphorically, literally. When the real thing hits, not the movie theater kind, not the roller coaster kind, but the kind where your brain genuinely registers danger, your skin goes cold. Your extremities go cold. The blood is doing what blood has done for 100,000 years, pulling back from the surface, protecting the vital organs, preparing the body for what comes next. I felt that cold on a Tuesday night in February, in my own home, in the house where my wife and I had lived for 3 years without a single incident. We'd bought the place in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, a nice neighborhood, the kind where people put out Christmas decorations early and wave at each other across driveways. The house was a 1970s ranch style with a finished main level and a partially finished basement that we mostly used for storage, laundry, and what my wife generously called my project zone, which was really just a corner where I kept tools and told myself I'd build things someday. That Tuesday night in February, my wife Claire and I were in bed watching a movie. One of those late-night situations where neither of you will admit you're falling asleep until the other one does first. I don't even remember what we were watching. What I remember is the moment the television went dark. Not just the TV, everything. The clock on the nightstand, the little indicator light in the cable box, the ambient glow from the hallway nightlight. All of it gone simultaneously in that way that only happens during a true power failure, like the whole house exhaled. Claire made a sound of pure irritation. I made a similar sound. We lay there for a moment in the dark, waiting for the power to come back the way it usually does. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a hiccup, and then back to normal. It didn't come back. "I'll check outside," I told her. I felt my way to the bedroom door, got my bearings in the hallway using the thin, cold strip of moonlight coming through the window at the end of the hall, and made my way to the front door. I opened it and stepped out onto the front step for maybe 5 seconds, long enough to confirm that the houses on both sides of us had lights on, that the street lamps were functioning, that this was not a neighborhood outage. This was just us. I went back inside and stood in the kitchen, thinking. The circuit breaker panel was in the basement utility room. It wasn't impossible that something had tripped. We had a relatively old system and I kept meaning to have it looked at. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the one we kept specifically for power outages, and opened the door to the basement stairs. Here's something specific about our house's layout that will matter to you in a moment. The basement stairs were steep, and the door to the actual basement was at the bottom of the staircase, not the top. So you descended the stairs and then had to pass through a second door to enter the basement proper. This is unusual, and I'd never thought much about it until that night. I went down the stairs. At the bottom, I grabbed the doorknob to the basement door and pushed. It didn't move. I tried again, putting my shoulder into it slightly. Nothing. The door felt solid, not stuck from swelling the way old wood doors do in winter, but actively held shut, like something on the other side was maintaining pressure against it. I stood there for a moment, genuinely confused. My wife occasionally locked that door. We'd talked about it after a news story about a home invasion a few towns over. But I hadn't heard her do it that night, and she'd been in bed with me all evening. I went back upstairs, down the hall, and knocked gently on the bedroom doorframe. Claire was still awake, sitting up in the dark with her phone flashlight on, reading something. "Did you lock the basement door?" I asked. "Earlier, yeah," she said. "I always do before bed. Keys on the hook." That made sense. She went to the kitchen with me, found the right key on the hook by the refrigerator, handed it to me, and went back to bed. I went back downstairs to the basement door, inserted the key, turned it until I felt the bolt retract, and pushed the door again. Still wouldn't open. This was no longer a simple inconvenience. This was strange. I stood at the bottom of those stairs. Cold concrete walls on either side of me, flashlight beam pointed at a door that should have opened. And I felt something shift in the atmosphere of that stairwell. Something that had nothing to do with the temperature. I went back upstairs and told Claire I needed her help. She came down the stairs in her socks, teasing me gently in that way she had when she thought I was overthinking something simple. She took the key from me, looked at the door, and before she even tried the key, she turned the knob and gave it a firm, confident push. The door creaked open. I stared at it. "It was locked," I said. "I couldn't get it open." "Mm-hmm," she said in the voice of someone who had decided to be kind about this. She went back upstairs. I went into the basement. I found the utility room, opened the small metal door of the breaker panel, and started working through the switches, toggling each one to the off position and back. On the fourth or fifth try, I heard the basement's overhead lights click on, a soft, fluorescent hum that under other circumstances would have been completely unremarkable. I pushed the little panel door shut. And from somewhere outside the utility room, from somewhere in the main basement area, I heard a door creak. Slow, deliberate. The specific sound of a door being moved by something with weight, not by air pressure or vibration. I stepped out of the utility room and looked at the two storage closets along the far wall. The one on the left was fully closed. The one on the right was open about 4 inches. Open enough for a person standing inside to see out without being seen. I stood in the center of that basement and stared at that gap. My mind was doing something that minds do when confronted with things they can't comfortably accept. It was generating explanations. Old house, old doors, humidity shifts, thermal expansion. It was doing everything it could to avoid the conclusion that was forming underneath all of those explanations, like a cold current beneath warm water. I thought, why was the basement door held shut from the inside? I thought, if it was locked, how did Claire open it without the key? And then, from inside that closet, I heard it. A single exhale. A low, slow, unmistakably human exhale. The kind that happens when someone has been holding their breath for a long time and finally, involuntarily, lets it go. I didn't think. I ran. I hit the basement stairs at full speed, took them 3 at a time, burst through the door at the top, and ran to the bedroom yelling Claire's name in a voice that I am not proud of. I told her exactly what I heard. This time there was no teasing in her expression. She sat up straight and grabbed her phone. I called 911. While we waited, I stood at the top of the basement stairs with the door shut and my hand on the doorknob, listening. For 6 or 7 minutes, the house was completely quiet. Then we heard glass breaking, coming from outside, around the back of the house. I went to the bedroom window but couldn't see anything in the backyard. Too dark, no floodlight back there, just formless shadow. Claire had moved into the hallway with the baseball bat she kept leaned against her nightstand. Yes, my wife has always been the more pragmatic one of the two of us. The police arrived within 8 minutes. 2 officers. I led them to the basement door and down the stairs. The closet door was now standing fully open. Inside, nothing. But on the far side of the basement, beneath the small hopper window near the ceiling, the kind of window that sits just above ground level and looks out onto the backyard, we found broken glass on the floor. The window frame had been pushed outward. On the floor below it were footprints in the concrete dust, pointed toward the wall, like someone had gathered themselves, stepped up onto the ledge where we kept storage bins, and gone out head first. Whoever was in our basement that night escaped through a window about 14 inches high and was never caught. The officers filed a report. They told us to change the window hardware, consider a security system, have someone look at the exterior points of entry. Standard stuff, professional, calming in its procedural steadiness. But here's the thing that stayed with me after they left. After we'd sat up all night with every light in the house blazing, after the glass company came the next morning and replaced the window. We lived in a nice neighborhood. The kind of neighborhood that seems hermetically sealed from this kind of thing. The kind of neighborhood where the biggest crime is leaving your garbage cans out too long. It can happen anywhere. That's the part I couldn't let go. It can happen to anyone. The shape in the hallway. Let me tell you what it feels like to work alone at night in a building that isn't supposed to be empty, and then discover that it isn't. I've been a custodial staff member at a mid-sized commuter college in the greater Atlanta area for going on 6 years now. I won't name the institution. This is partly for my own privacy, but also because the administration was made aware of what I'm about to describe, and their handling of it was, let's say, not something I want to advertise on their behalf. What I can tell you is that it's a large campus, multiple buildings, a student population of roughly 8,000, and the kind of institution that runs summer sessions because it has to, not because anyone's particularly enthusiastic about being there when it's 94 degrees outside. My shift runs from 1 in the afternoon to 9 at night, which means I'm often working the later hours when the campus population thins out significantly. By 8 o'clock on a typical night, I might encounter a handful of faculty finishing up office hours, maybe a cluster of students in the library or computer labs. By 8:30, most buildings are down to security walkthroughs and the faint hum of HVAC systems. I like those late hours, honestly. I worked faster without foot traffic. I could run a buffer in the main hallway without worrying about startling someone. There was a rhythm to it. The night I'm describing was a Thursday in late July. The summer session was in its final 2 weeks. I was assigned to the Activity Center, the largest non-academic building on campus, housing a full ballroom, a small black box theater, a game room, a fitness annex, and 4 general-purpose meeting rooms. The building sat at the eastern end of campus, slightly removed from the main academic quad. On most summer evenings, it was the quietest building I cleaned. The storm that rolled in around 6 that evening was the kind that you feel before you see. The pressure shift, the sudden stillness in the air, then the leading edge of wind that kicks up dust and sends paper across the parking lot. By 7 o'clock, it had escalated to something genuinely serious. Horizontal rain against the windows, flickering in the overhead lights, the kind of thunder that vibrates the floors. I was in the lower level working my way through the game room. Pool tables, foosball, a row of arcade machines along one wall. Nobody down there but me. I had my card, my supplies, my earbuds in with the volume low enough that I could hear the building around me, which I always recommend, and which on this particular night may have been the most important habit of my life. At approximately 7:40, the power went out. Not a flicker this time, not a gradual fade. A hard cut, and then absolute darkness except for the red emergency exit signs, which cast the room in the color of something about to go wrong. I pulled my earbuds out immediately. I stood still for a moment waiting to hear the emergency generator kick on. It didn't, or if it did, it wasn't powerful enough to do much. I called my colleague Terrence, who was working in the Sciences building 2 quads over. "Same here," he said. "Whole campus is probably down. Storm must have hit a substation." I hung up and thought through my options. With the power out, my cleaning responsibilities were effectively suspended. I couldn't run equipment, and moving a wet mop through a darkened room in an emergency situation wasn't exactly protocol. What was protocol was making sure the building was clear before locking up, which meant I needed to do a sweep. I turned on my phone's flashlight and oriented myself toward the exit sign. That's when I saw the head. It appeared around the corner of the stairwell doorway. Not a full figure, just a head and part of a shoulder at approximately my height, leaning around the frame in a way that felt deliberate, like someone who wanted to look at something without being seen looking at it. I called out, "Hey, anybody there? Building's going dark. I need everyone to head out." But even as the words were leaving my mouth, the head withdrew and disappeared upstairs. I went to the stairwell. I stood at the bottom looking up into darkness broken only by faint emergency lighting at the top of the stairs. I could hear my own pulse. Here's the thing about my job that most people don't consider. I was responsible for this building. If something happened after I locked up, if someone got trapped inside, if there was an incident, that was on me. I couldn't just leave. I had to make sure the building was empty. I went upstairs. The main floor of the activity center was a single long corridor that ran in a rectangle around the ballroom, which occupied the center of the building. Emergency lights were installed at intervals throughout this hallway, but the emphasis in that sentence belongs on the word intervals. They were spaced far enough apart that between each one was a significant stretch of genuine darkness, pools of shadow that the weak emergency light barely touched. I started moving down the hallway to my right, making a clockwise loop. I called out several more times, "Campus staff, building is closing. Please make your way to an exit," and heard nothing in response. I checked the first meeting room. Empty. I checked the entrance to the theater. Dark, silent, empty. I was passing the midpoint of the hallway when I heard footsteps behind me. I'm not a person who hears things easily. Occupational hazard of working in large buildings. Your ears calibrate to the ambient noise, and you learn to filter out what's normal. These footsteps were not ambient. They were specific. They had rhythm and weight. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. I turned, moved back toward the last emergency light behind me, and stood under it, making myself visible, and looked down the hallway. Nothing. Empty corridor fading into shadow. I continued my loop, checked the remaining meeting rooms, checked the bathrooms, checked every space where a person could reasonably be standing, sitting, or hiding. Nothing. By my count, the building was empty. I headed toward the front exit. The lobby of the activity center was a wide, open space with tall windows facing the main parking lot and a half-wall divider near the entrance doors that partially shielded a sitting area with chairs and small tables. It was a space designed for gathering, for people waiting for events to start, for casual conversation. At that moment, there was one person in it. I saw them when I was about 20 feet from the front doors, standing half behind the half wall, partially concealed, with just enough of their form visible in the ambient parking lot light coming through the windows to register as human. A silhouette. That's the only way I can describe it. Not because the conditions didn't allow for more detail, but because there was something about this person. The way they were standing, the way they weren't moving. That resisted detail. That seemed to exist in the space between being seen and not being seen. I said, "Sir, ma'am, I need you to please exit the building immediately. I'm locking up." The silhouette didn't respond, didn't move toward the door, didn't speak. And then it moved. Not toward the exit, not toward me, but sideways, sliding back behind the half wall and out of my line of sight with a speed that felt practiced, intentional. I was done. I am a custodial worker at a college campus. I am not security. I am not law enforcement. I am not trained or equipped or paid to physically confront an unresponsive individual who is deliberately concealing themselves in a building I'm trying to close. I went out the front doors, stood in the rain, called campus police, and told them what I'd seen. They came quickly. 3 officers, a radio crackling, flashlights sweeping. They did a full sweep of the building while I stood under the awning and tried to stop shaking. They found nothing. I drove home that night replaying every detail, trying to find some version of events where the silhouette in the lobby had an innocent explanation. A student who panicked and ran when they heard me. A faculty member who didn't want to deal with being questioned. Someone who was embarrassed or scared or just bad at social situations. I was still working through those possibilities when my phone rang. It was the campus police dispatcher. She asked me to describe the person I'd seen in as much detail as possible. I told her I couldn't. No distinctive clothing, no visible face, nothing that I could offer as an identifying description. There was a pause on the line. Then she told me that a local resident had reported spotting an individual matching a suspect description near the campus perimeter within the last 2 hours. The suspect was wanted in connection with a violent crime in a neighboring county. They had been evading law enforcement for approximately 18 hours. She thanked me for calling it in. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after that call ended. Here's what I've thought about many times since. I walked that hallway. I was 20 feet from whoever was in that lobby. I turned my back on them, and the only reason I know I walked away is because I did. I took several months off from closing duties after that. My supervisor was understanding. I eventually went back to my regular shift, but I never worked alone in that building at night again. Some things you learn once, and they stay learned. What the dark keeps. You've heard 3 stories now, 3 separate nights, 3 different locations, 3 different people whose lives intersected, without their knowledge or consent, with something waiting in the dark. You might be looking for the pattern. Humans always look for the pattern. It's the thing that kept us alive on open savannas. The same instinct that makes us see faces in clouds and hear voices in static. We want the dots to connect because connected dots mean understanding, and understanding means control. So let me offer you the patterns I've found, not to reassure you, but because I think you deserve the unvarnished truth about what these 3 stories share. They all happened in the dark, not metaphorically, literally. In each case, the loss of power was the precipitating event. The lights going out created the conditions. The disorientation, the limited sensory information, the disruption of normal routine, that allowed what followed to happen. Whether that's coincidence or something else, I'll leave for you to decide. But I notice it. In each case, the person who was hiding had a reason to be there. Not a good reason, not a justified reason, but a reason. They were concealed in a space that offered shelter, darkness, access to the building's interior, and a reasonable assumption that they wouldn't be found. They weren't waiting in the middle of the room. They were in corners, in closets, behind walls. They knew how to make themselves small. In each case, there was a moment, a specific, identifiable moment, where the outcome could have been very different. The construction worker who went back alone after his crew left. The husband who descended into the basement a second time after everyone else had gone to bed. The custodian who walked back toward the lobby when he could have waited outside. Those moments. Those decisions. Each of them, in retrospect, looked like mistakes. And each of them, by some extraordinary combination of luck and instinct, ended without the worst possible outcome. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think the thing that makes these stories genuinely terrifying, more terrifying than any fabricated ghost story or manufactured jump scare, is the specific quality of their reality. These are not stories about supernatural entities that cannot be reasoned with. These are stories about human beings choosing to hide in spaces they had no right to occupy, waiting for something, wanting something, operating by a logic that we as the reader are never given access to. What did the figure in the corner of that Houston basement want? What was the person in the Columbus closet hoping to accomplish? Who was the silhouette in the Atlanta lobby? And what would have happened if the custodian had approached instead of retreating? We don't know. That's the horror, not the monster, not the creature, not the thing with claws and teeth that you can see coming. The horror is the gap between what you know and what you don't. The horror is that small, specific moment when you realize something is wrong and you have no information about how wrong it is. There's a psychological phenomenon that researchers call the dark effect, the measurable increase in anxiety and perceived threat that humans experience in low or no light conditions. It's ancient, hardwired, completely rational from an evolutionary standpoint. In the dark, your threat detection systems operate at maximum sensitivity, while your ability to accurately assess those threats drops significantly. You hear more. You imagine more. You cannot verify what you're sensing against what you're seeing. The flip side of this, and it's important, is that the people who were hiding in these stories also knew this. They counted on it. The dark was not just incidentally present in these situations. In several cases, it's reasonable to wonder whether the darkness was deliberately induced. A tripped breaker, a held door, a building that went quiet at exactly the right time. I'm not saying that's what happened in each of these cases. I'm saying, think about it, because the people who were hiding weren't passive. They were making choices. They were managing their exposure. The figure in the Houston basement was standing face to a wall, a posture that eliminated the reflective surface of a face, one of the most visible things in a flashlight beam. The person in the Columbus basement held a door shut until they needed to release it. The Atlanta silhouette never once moved toward an exit, even when told to leave. These are not the behaviors of people who stumbled into these spaces accidentally. These are behaviors with intention behind them. I want to tell you something that I don't think gets said enough in conversations about personal safety, because most personal safety advice is framed around unlikely catastrophic scenarios. The stranger in the parking garage, the intruder breaking down the front door. Those things happen, but the more common version of this kind of danger is quieter. It's the thing you almost didn't notice. The sound that you almost explained away. The door that almost opened the way it was supposed to. The construction worker almost didn't go back down those stairs. He knew on some level that he should leave, but something in him needed to know. And in his case, that need didn't get him hurt. It just gave him a story that he's still thinking about years later. The husband in Columbus could have convinced himself the exhale was his own imagination. That's what I would have done, probably. Most of us, given the choice between, "I imagined that," and "there is a person hiding in my closet," will reach for the first option for as long as we possibly can. He didn't. He ran. He called the police. He did it right. The custodian in Atlanta walked out of that building, called campus police, and let trained professionals handle what came next. He got the call later that night that told him, in the most indirect and still completely devastating way, exactly how close he might have been to something irreversible. 3 different responses, 3 different outcomes. All of them ultimately safe, not because these people were heroes, but because they listened to the thing inside themselves that was trying to tell them something. Here's what I want you to take from this. Your instincts are not decoration. They're not anxiety disorders waiting to be medicated. They're not the product of an overactive imagination or a culture of fear. They are the oldest and most reliable technology your body has, refined over an incomprehensibly long evolutionary history, specifically designed to register threat before your conscious mind can articulate it. When something feels wrong, it is almost never nothing. When a door doesn't open the way it should, that matters. When a room sounds different than it did a minute ago, that matters. When the lights go out and the first thing you feel is not annoyance, but dread. Listen to that. Don't explain it away. Don't perform calm for the people around you. Don't go back down the stairs alone. The man in Houston went back alone, and was lucky. The woman in Columbus trusted her husband's fear, and stayed upstairs while the police handled it. The custodian in Atlanta called for backup, and let the people with training and authority do what they were trained and authorized to do. The lights go out, and in that moment you have a choice. You can fill the darkness with explanations, or you can listen to what the darkness is telling you. The people who come out of these situations okay, not because nothing bad happened, but because they navigated it, are the ones who listened, who took the feeling seriously before they had evidence to justify it. Trust the feeling. Leave the building. Call someone. Don't go back down alone. These 3 accounts were shared with permission and reconstructed from first-person testimony. Names identifying locations and certain specific details have been altered to protect the privacy of those involved. The events described occurred in Texas, Ohio, and Georgia, respectively. The suspect in the final account was apprehended 11 days after the incident, in a county approximately 40 miles from the college campus. He was never connected to any criminal activity on campus grounds. What he was doing in that building, in that lobby, standing behind that half wall in the dark, that part was never established. Some questions stay open. Stay safe out there. Expanding the darkness. Additional accounts. Author's note. The following accounts were submitted to me by individuals who reached out after the initial version of this piece circulated among true crime and paranormal adjacent communities online. They are presented here in condensed narrative form, with identifying details altered. The parking structure, Portland, Oregon. A woman named Renee, late 30s, a night shift pharmaceutical technician, was leaving a hospital complex after a 12-hour shift at approximately 2 in the morning when her car wouldn't start in the employee parking structure. This was a concrete multi-level structure, 5 floors, partially underground. She called roadside assistance and was told the wait would be 45 minutes to an hour. She sat in her car with the doors locked and the hazard lights running. The structure was mostly empty at that hour. A few vehicles scattered across the floor, no other people visible. At some point around 2:30, the lights in the structure went out. Renee said she immediately felt the quality of the darkness as wrong. Not just dark, but pressurized. The way people sometimes describe spaces they later learn were sites of traumatic events. She turned on her phone flashlight and pointed it toward the concrete pillars around her. Between two pillars, approximately 30 feet ahead of her, she saw a figure standing, not moving, not approaching, just standing, positioned with the pillar partially obscuring them, watching her vehicle. Renee did not get out of the car. She called 911 immediately and stayed on the line with the dispatcher until officers arrived, which took 11 minutes. By then, the structure lights had come back on. The officers found no one. Her roadside assistance arrived 12 minutes after that. She got a jump start, drove home, and called her hospital's security office the next morning. They reviewed the security footage from that floor. The footage from the 45 minutes of Renee's wait in that structure was corrupted. All of it. The head of hospital security told her it was probably a storage error related to the power outage. Renee doesn't work night shifts anymore. The rest stop, I-70, Western Kansas. A long-haul truck driver named Marcus, late 40s, 22 years on the road, stopped at a rural rest area along E-70 in western Kansas around 3 in the morning. He'd pulled his rig into the truck section, set his parking brake, and was planning on sleeping for 4 hours before continuing west. He'd been in the sleeper berth for maybe 20 minutes when all the lights at the rest stop, the overhead lot lights, the lights inside the small facility building, everything went dark simultaneously. He assumed a power issue with the facility and thought nothing of it. It was dark outside, but truck stops and rest areas on rural highways have their own ambient dark. It didn't alarm him. What alarmed him was the sound. A slow scraping along the side of his trailer. Not wind, not debris, but the deliberate dragging of something solid along the full length of the trailer, from the back toward the cab. Long, slow, and then stopping. Just outside his door. Marcus had driven over 2 million miles. He had stopped at every rest stop on every major interstate in the continental United States. He described what he felt in that moment as the cleanest fear I have ever felt in my life. Not confused, not uncertain, just completely and instantly clear. He turned on every light in the cab. He sat up in the seat. B. Activated his air horn. One long, sustained blast that was about the loudest thing available to him in that moment. Heard running footsteps receding away from the cab, across the gravel, into whatever was beyond the perimeter of the rest area. He drove through the night without stopping and filed a report with the Kansas Highway Patrol at the next way station. The officer who took his report told him there had been 2 other incidents at that rest stop in the previous 8 months involving individuals attempting to access vehicles in the lot after the facility lights went out. He didn't sleep at a rest stop alone again for 3 years. The vacation rental, Smoky Mountains, Tennessee. A family of 4, parents in their 40s, 2 teenage daughters, was staying at a rental cabin in the Smoky Mountains when a severe thunderstorm knocked out power to their cabin and the surrounding area on their second night there. The parents, David and Sandra, had sent the girls to their room with tablet devices and battery packs. David went to check the breaker panel, which was in a small locked utility closet attached to the outside of the cabin. He unlocked it, discovered that the main breaker had tripped, reset it, and the power came back on. Coming back inside, Sandra asked him if he'd locked the sliding glass door before they went to bed. He had not. She'd found it standing slightly open, not ajar, not cracked, but open enough that a person could have entered from the back deck. She said it had been closed when she checked it before the power went out. She was certain. They both looked at the back deck through the glass door. They both saw at the edge of the deck where it met the tree line what appeared to be a flashlight beam moving between the trees, moving away from the cabin, back into the woods, unhurried. They locked every door and window, gathered the girls into the master bedroom, and called both 911 and the property management company. A sheriff's deputy arrived within 25 minutes. He found no one, but he noted that the gravel path leading to the rear of the property showed signs of recent foot traffic, footprints in the wet earth along the tree line. The family checked out the following morning. They did not receive a refund. The property management company later disclosed in response to a formal complaint that there had been a prior incident at the property involving an unauthorized individual discovered on the premises. They had not disclosed this at time of booking. The office building, downtown Memphis. A security guard named Antoine, late 20s, working a solo overnight shift at a mid-rise commercial office building in downtown Memphis, experienced a partial power failure at approximately 1 in the morning that knocked out lighting on floors 4 through 7, while leaving the lobby and lower floors operational. Standard procedure was to sweep the affected floors during any power disruption. Antoine did his sweep of floors 4 and 5 without incident. On floor 6, he heard a voice. Not words, just a voice. A low murmur, distinctly human, coming from one of the dark conference rooms along the south corridor. He stopped outside the door and knocked. The murmuring stopped. He announced himself. Building security, anyone in there needs to exit immediately, and pushed the door open, flashlight up. The room was empty, but the murmuring was now coming from the next room down the hall. Antoine followed it through 2 more rooms before it simply stopped. He did a full sweep of floor 6 and found nothing. On floor 7, however, he found a service elevator that had been placed in manual mode and parked at floor 7 from the inside, something that required a specific key code that only maintenance personnel and management possessed. Someone had used authorized access to place the elevator there. Antoine called the building manager, who called the elevator service company, who determined that the override had been initiated approximately 2 hours before Antoine's shift began, which meant either someone with the code had been in the building since before his shift, or the code had been compromised. They were never able to determine which. The building's exterior security camera footage from that evening showed a figure exiting through a service door on the north side of the building at approximately 1:47 a.m. No identification was ever made. Accounts 4 through 7, approximately 1,100 words. Running total, 7,166 words. The anatomy of a close call. What happens in your brain when the lights go out? It's worth understanding this, not academically, but practically, because the answer has direct implications for every single story in this piece, and for how you might respond if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. The human brain processes threat information along 2 pathways simultaneously. The first is the fast pathway, a direct route from your sensory organs to your amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for threat response, which activates your fear response and prepares your body for action within milliseconds. This pathway is crude. It doesn't wait for full information. It reacts to pattern fragments, to incomplete data, to the possibility of threat rather than its confirmation. The second is the slow pathway, a longer route through your cortex, which processes detailed information, compares it against memory and experience, and generates a rational analysis of the situation. This pathway takes longer, sometimes significantly longer, and it's the one responsible for the internal monologue that says, "It's probably just the wind," or "I'm sure there's an explanation for this." In low light or no light conditions, the fast pathway gains significant advantage. The slow pathway needs visual information to do its work. Without it, the cortex is operating with reduced input, which means it's less effective at suppressing the fear response generated by the amygdala. Translation: in the dark, you feel fear more intensely, trust your fear more readily, and are less equipped to rationally override it. This is by design. This is the correct behavior for this situation. The problem is that modern life has trained most of us to distrust our fast pathway. We've been socialized to believe that fear without visible, articulable cause is irrational, that a feeling of dread in a situation that looks fine on the surface is a personal failing, a character flaw, evidence of anxiety or neurosis. We've been taught to override the fast pathway with the slow one, to require evidence before allowing ourselves to respond to threat. That training kills people. Not most of the time, not always, but sometimes in the specific kind of situation described throughout this document: a dark space, an anomalous sound, a feeling that something is present that shouldn't be. The gap between what your fast pathway is screaming and what your slow pathway is politely suggesting is the gap between a safe outcome and a catastrophic one. Here is what the research actually shows about human threat response and close calls. Survivors tend to act on incomplete information. The people who make it out of genuinely dangerous situations are rarely the ones who waited for certainty before acting. Certainty in genuine threat situations often comes too late to be useful. The people who survived the situations in this piece, the construction worker, the couple in Columbus, the custodian in Atlanta, all acted before they had complete information. They acted on the feeling, the sound, the wrongness, before they could prove any of it. Hesitation is not caution. There is a common misconception that stopping to think carefully about a threatening situation is the safe, rational response. In some contexts, that's true. In the specific context of you are possibly not alone in a dark, enclosed space, hesitation is frequently the most dangerous choice available to you. The amygdala doesn't hesitate. Evolution didn't survive long enough to produce us by hesitating. Get out, call for help, and process the experience in a well-lit place with other people present. Your body knows before you do. Every person in this collection describes a physical sensation that preceded conscious understanding: the skin going cold, the heart rate spiking, the sudden stillness. These are not symptoms of overreaction. These are the fast pathway doing exactly what it was built to do, alerting the organism to threat before the organism has processed enough information to acknowledge the threat consciously. This is a feature. Treat it as one. A practical note on situational awareness: the following is not a comprehensive personal safety guide. It is a set of specific observations derived from the accounts in this collection. Know your exits before you need them. The custodian in Atlanta spent time in that building every day of his working life. He knew where the exits were without thinking about it. When the moment came, he moved toward an exit by reflex. In any unfamiliar space, a parking structure, a vacation rental, a hotel, a new office building, spend 30 seconds identifying the exits when you arrive. This costs you nothing and may someday matter enormously. Trust anomalies. When something doesn't behave the way it should, a door that won't open, a sound in a room that should be empty, a light that was on when you left and isn't when you return. Treat it as meaningful until proven otherwise. The inverse instinct to find the innocent explanation first is normal and human, and sometimes lethal. Establish a communication baseline. Before entering a potentially isolated situation, a solo trip into a basement, a late-night sweep of an empty building, a stop at a rural rest area in the middle of the night, tell someone where you are. Specific. "I'm going into the basement to check the breaker" is enough. "I'm going to be at a rest stop on I-70 around mile marker 120 for about 4 hours is enough. This takes approximately 8 seconds and means someone knows where to start looking. Sound matters more than sight in the dark. When your visual processing is impaired, your auditory threat detection is compensating. An anomalous sound in the dark, particularly a sound that suggests presence, like breathing, footsteps, or shifting weight, should be weighted more heavily than you might under normal circumstances. You're not imagining it. Your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do. The moment you feel you should leave, leave. Not in a minute. Not after you check one more room, confirm one more thing, get one more look at the thing that's worrying you. The moment the feeling arrives, the moment you would later describe, if asked, as the moment I knew something was wrong. That is the exit point. Everything after that moment increases your risk and decreases your options. The light we carry. There's a version of this piece that ends with statistics, burglary rates by region, percentage of home invasions that occur at night, comparative safety data between urban and rural environments. I considered writing that version, but I don't think that's actually what you came here for. You came here because something in these accounts resonated with something you've already felt. Maybe you've walked through a dark house at 2 a.m. and felt, just for a moment, the particular certainty that you were not alone. Maybe you've heard something behind a closed door and stood there with your hand on the knob, just 1 second longer than made sense. Maybe you've had the experience of being in a space that was supposed to be empty and feeling with every animal instinct you possessed that it wasn't. Most of the time, nothing is there. Most of the time, the sound was settling pipes and the figure was a shadow, and the feeling was the cumulative weight of a long day and an overactive imagination. Most of the time, you open the door and there's nothing on the other side. But sometimes there is, and the thing I want you to carry out of this piece, the thing that I think matters more than any statistic, more than any safety protocol, more than any list of recommendations, is this. You are allowed to take your fear seriously. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to call for help. You are allowed to make decisions based on a feeling you can't prove, and a sound you can't confirm, and a wrongness in the air that nobody else in the room seems to be registering. You are allowed to be wrong about it. You are allowed to feel foolish afterward. You are allowed to discover that the person in the corner was a coat on a hook, or the exhale was the house settling, or the footsteps were your own echo. Being wrong about fear costs you embarrassment. Being right and ignoring it can cost you everything. The construction worker in Houston eventually left the trade. He manages a building supply store now, he says, and he doesn't go into basements alone. He said this with a laugh, the kind of laugh that has real experience underneath it. Claire and her husband installed a full home security system after the incident in Columbus. Cameras, sensors on every window, keypad locks on the interior basement door. She said the peace of mind was worth every penny. She also said she still sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night and lies still, listening, before she'll let herself believe the house is quiet. The custodian in Atlanta transferred to a different campus 6 months after his experience. He said the new campus was smaller and better lit. He said he doesn't work closing shifts anymore if he can help it. He said he thinks about that lobby sometimes, about the silhouette behind the half wall, about the 11 days between when he saw it and when the suspect was caught, and what that person might have been thinking, standing there in the dark, watching him walk toward the door. 3 ordinary nights, 3 ordinary people doing ordinary things, and then the lights went out. The dark is not your enemy, but it is a place where other things have the advantage. It levels certain playing fields that you would prefer to stay level. It gives cover to things that prefer cover. It slows you down while some other things speed up. Carry your light with you. Not just the flashlight on your vest, or the phone in your pocket, or the emergency candle in the drawer. Carry the knowledge that your instincts are not your weakness. They are your oldest, most tested, most reliable protection. When the lights go out, trust them.